The air on the docks always smelled the same before dawn. It was a layered scent, a history of the place told through the nose. Underneath everything was the deep, briny smell of the Atlantic itself, cold and clean and vast. Layered on top was the funk of the low-tide mudflats, the sharp, metallic tang of diesel from the boats, and the ghost of a million fish, their lives and deaths soaked into the very grain of the wooden planks beneath my worn-out sneakers. It was a smell I had come to associate with a specific kind of loneliness, the quiet, pre-dawn kind where the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the sun to give it permission to start again. I was usually the first one here, a habit I'd picked up in my other life, the academic one I was taking a sabbatical from. That life was all libraries and lecture halls, the scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in slivers of light through tall windows. This life, my summer penance or escape, depending on the day, was all salt and work and a man I couldn't stop watching. My job was simple. I was the glorified deckhand, the gear hauler, the cooler scrubber for Finn's charter fishing boat, the Siren. Finn was the opposite of everything I was. Where I was all soft edges and internal monologue, he was solid muscle and quiet action. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime on the water, every step sure, every knot tied with a fluid grace that was mesmerizing. He was, to my knowledge and by all local accounts, straight. He dated the town librarian off and on, a pretty, quiet woman named Sarah. He drank beer with the other fishermen on Friday nights. He was a good man, a steady man, the kind of man who was a pillar of a small coastal community. He was also the walking, breathing embodiment of a longing so deep in my chest it sometimes felt like a physical ache. So I kept my head down. I did my work. I scrubbed fish guts, coiled ropes, and listened to his low, calm voice give instructions. I collected my pay and went back to my rented room above the bait shop. And I watched him. I watched the way the sun crinkled the corners of his eyes, the way his dark hair was perpetually damp with sea spray, the way his large, calloused hands could fix a snarled line with a patience that seemed almost holy. It was a hopeless, silent kind of worship, and I had accepted it as the background radiation of my summer. But that morning was different. He wasn't supposed to be back. He'd taken the boat out for a solo overnight trip, chasing something far offshore, and wasn't due until noon. My job was just to prep for the afternoon charter, hosing down the deck, stocking the bait freezer. The sun was still just a pale blush on the eastern horizon when I heard the low thrum of his boat's engine cutting through the morning stillness. It was too early. A knot of anxiety, sharp and unfamiliar, tightened in my stomach. Something was wrong. I stood there on the dock, my hand frozen on the nozzle of the hose, as the siren slid expertly into its slip. The engine cut out, and the sudden silence was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the hull and the cry of a distant gull. Finn moved in the dim light, securing the lines with those practiced, efficient movements. He didn't call out a greeting. He didn't even seem to register I was there at first. He just worked, his focus absolute. Finally, he swung a single, massive cooler from the deck onto the dock. It landed with a heavy, solid thud that seemed to echo in the quiet air. He straightened up, and for the first time, he looked at me. His face was usually unreadable, a calm mask weathered by sun and sea. But this morning, in the gray pre-dawn light, I saw something else there. Fatigue, yes, but something deeper. A tension in the set of his jaw, a darkness in his eyes that wasn't just lack of sleep. He wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a smear of grime. He was wearing an old, dark sweatshirt, stained and smelling of the ocean, and his jeans were damp. He looked tired down to the bone. He just stood there for a long moment, the cooler between us, the silence stretching until it became a tangible thing. My heart was thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I should say something. Everything okay? Or, you're back early, but the words wouldn't form. I was just an observer, as always. Then he moved. He took 2 steps toward me, closing the space until he was right in front of me. I could smell the cold salt on his skin, the faint scent of coffee on his breath. He looked down at my hands, which were still clenched around the hose, white-knuckled. He reached out, not with a quick grab, but with a slow, deliberate motion. His fingers, calloused and surprisingly warm, slid between my own. He didn't just take my hand. He laced his fingers through mine, A gesture so unexpected, so intimate. It sent a jolt straight through my system, short-circuiting every thought in my head. My hand felt small and lost in his. He held my gaze, his own unwavering. The dark circles under his eyes made their blue seem even more intense. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and rough with exhaustion. "Give me a hand." The words were simple, a straightforward request. But the way he said them, the way his thumb brushed almost imperceptibly against my knuckles, the way our fingers were woven together like we'd done it 1,000 times before, it felt like a question, a plea, a confession, all rolled into one. My mind went completely blank. All I could feel was the solid, warm weight of his hand holding mine. All I could think was, yes. I let the hose clatter to the dock, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. I didn't pull my hand away. I couldn't. It felt anchored there. With what? My own voice was a croak, a stranger's voice. Finn's gaze dropped to the cooler. A good problem to have. He gave my hand a slight squeeze, a gentle tug, and then he let go. The absence of his touch was immediate and sharp, a sudden cold spot on my skin. He bent down and unlatched the heavy lid of the cooler. The smell that hit me was the clean, cold scent of the deep sea and fresh fish. It was packed to the brim with ice, and nestled within it was the largest tuna I had ever seen in my life. It was a monster, a beautiful, silver-blue torpedo of muscle that must have weighed hundreds of pounds. "Holy!" I breathed, the word trailing off. "Yeah," he said, a faint hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time. It was a tired smile, but it was there. "Fought me half the night. Engine was acting up on the way back. I'm running on fumes." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I need to get this broken down and on ice before the sun gets too high. Can't do it alone. Not this size." This was the logical explanation. The perfectly reasonable, utterly platonic reason for his request. He was exhausted. He had a massive, valuable fish to deal with, and I was the only person there. The hand-holding, that must have been a mistake. A miscalculation born of fatigue. He was probably reaching for my arm or my wrist, and just missed. Yes, that had to be it. My brain desperately scrambled for the rational explanation, the one that would allow the world to click back into its proper axis, the one where Finn was my straight boss and I was his lonely deckhand. But my hand still tingled where his had been. My heart was still hammering a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. "Of course," I said, finding my professional voice, the one that was calm and capable. "Whatever you need." He nodded, the tired smile gone, replaced by his usual focused expression. "Good. Let's get it into the shed." The next few hours were a blur of intense, focused labor. The processing shed was a small, functional space at the end of the dock, smelling perpetually of bleach and salt water. It was chilly inside, the concrete floor always damp. He, really, with me as his assistant, maneuvered the giant fish onto the huge stainless steel processing table. The sheer size and power of the creature, even in death, was humbling. Finn worked with a surgeon's precision. His exhaustion seemed to fall away, replaced by an intense concentration that was captivating to watch. I had seen him work before, of course, but never like this. This was different. This was his art. He sharpened his knives with long, smooth strokes on a whetstone, the rhythmic shing-shing-shing of steel on stone, the only sound in the shed. I stood back, handing him things before he asked for them. A bucket, a hose, a fresh cloth, trying to anticipate his needs, trying to be useful, trying not to stare. But I stared. I couldn't help it. I watched the play of muscles in his forearms as he wielded the long, flexible blade. I watched the fine, dark hairs on his arms, glistening with moisture under the harsh fluorescent lights. I watched the line of his back, the way his sweatshirt stretched taut across his shoulders when he leaned over the table. He was a study in contained strength, and every movement was filled with a purpose and a certainty that I, in my life of books and theories, had never known. The space was tight. We were constantly brushing up against each other. A shoulder against my arm as he reached past me for the hose. His hip bumping mine as we moved around the table. At one point, he needed me to hold a large section of the fish steady while he made a difficult cut. He positioned me, his hands briefly on my waist, guiding me into place. His touch was firm, impersonal, purely functional. But it sent a wildfire through my veins. I stood there, my own hands braced on the cold, slippery fish, my body rigid, every nerve ending screamingly aware of him standing so close behind me. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing, steady and even, right by my ear. He's just working, I told myself, my inner voice a frantic whisper. This means nothing. It's just a job. He's tired. He held your hand by accident. Stop it. Just stop. But the analysis was relentless. My brain, the one I used to deconstruct postmodern literature and philosophical treatises, was now dedicated entirely to the impossible task of deciphering Finn. Why did he look at me like that on the dock? Why, when he was so precise in every other movement, had his hand been so clumsy as to accidentally lace his fingers with mine? Or was it not clumsy at all? Was it a signal I was too afraid to interpret? He finished the cut and grunted in satisfaction. Okay, easy now. He moved away, and the loss of his proximity was as sharp as his knife. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We worked in a comfortable silence, for the most part. The only sounds were the scrape of knives, the spray of water, the thud of heavy loins of tuna being packed into beds of ice in smaller coolers. The silence felt different from our usual silences on the boat. It wasn't the silence of a boss and his employee. It felt shared. We were two people engaged in a single, demanding task, a team. You're a natural at this, he said at one point, his voice startling me out of my reverie. I looked up. He was watching me as I meticulously scrubbed down the steel table, my movements methodical. At cleaning, I asked, a small, self-deprecating smile on my face. My mother would be thrilled to hear that. He didn't smile back. He just watched me, his expression serious. No. At this. The quiet. The work. Most of the summer guys I hire can't stop talking. Nerves, I guess. Or they try too hard to impress me. He paused, wiping his knife on a cloth. You're just here. You do the work. You don't fill the space with noise. The observation was so acute, so perceptive, it felt like he had peeled back a layer of my skin and looked right inside me. That was exactly it. I didn't fill the space with noise because I was terrified of saying the wrong thing, of revealing too much. My silence was a shield, and he had just called it a virtue. I'm better at listening, I said, my voice quiet. I've noticed, he said, and then he went back to his work, leaving me to grapple with the weight of those two simple words. I've noticed. He saw me. He actually saw me. Not just as a pair of hands to haul gear, but as a person. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. By the time we finished, the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the docks. The shed was clean, smelling sharply of bleach, and 5 large coolers were packed with perfectly processed, ice-cold tuna loins, ready for the market. It was a fortune in fish, the result of his sleepless night and our silent morning of labor. We stood in the doorway of the shed, blinking in the new morning light. The usual bustle of the docks was starting up around us, other fishermen prepping their boats, the bait shop owner rolling up his metal door. The world was waking up, and the strange, isolated bubble we had been in for the past few hours had popped. Finn stretched, his arms reaching high above his head, and the hem of his sweatshirt rode up, revealing a tantalizing strip of tanned skin and the hard line of his abdomen. I quickly looked away, my face growing warm. He let out a long, weary sigh. I need a coffee, he said, and a shower. In that order, he looked at me, a real, genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. It transformed his face, chasing away the last of the shadows. I couldn't have done that without you, Leo. Thank you. Anytime, I said, my voice still a little shaky. It was impressive. The fish or the knife work? He asked, a teasing glint in his eye. Both, I admitted. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. Come on. I'll buy you breakfast. It's the least I can do. He started walking toward the small parking lot, not waiting for an answer, just assuming I would follow. And I did. Of course I did. We went to the Salty Dog Diner, a local institution where the coffee was strong and the pancakes were the size of hubcaps. The place was already humming with the morning crowd, mostly fishermen and locals grabbing breakfast before their day started. We slid into a worn vinyl booth in the back corner. The air smelled of bacon and coffee and maple syrup. It was a warm, comforting smell, a world away from the cold, clean scent of the processing shed. Finn ordered a massive breakfast, 3 eggs, a pile of bacon, hash browns, and a short stack of pancakes. I just asked for coffee. My stomach was a tangled mess of nerves. I couldn't imagine eating. He leaned back in the booth, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him. The fatigue was still there, etched in the lines around his eyes, but the tension was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary satisfaction. "So," he said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug, warming them. "Professor, what's a guy like you doing scrubbing fish guts on my boat?" The question was direct, but his tone was genuinely curious, not judgmental. It was a question I had been waiting for all summer. "Taking a break," I said, which was the truth, but not the whole truth. I was burned out. Needed to do something with my hands instead of my head for a while. He nodded slowly, his gaze steady on me. "I get that. Sometimes the ocean is the only thing that can quiet my head." He took a sip of his coffee. "What do you teach?" "Comparative literature," I said. The words felt foreign in this place, like a language from another country. A slow grin spread across his face. "Comp what now?" I couldn't help but laugh. "It's basically reading books from different cultures and talking about them." "Huh," he said, taking another sip of coffee. "And people pay you for that?" The teasing was gentle, good-natured. It was easy to fall into a rhythm with him, a simple back and forth that felt surprisingly natural. We talked. He asked me about the books I taught, and I tried to explain Foucault to a man who wrestled giant fish from the ocean for a living. It was absurd and hilarious, and for the first time all summer, I didn't feel like an outsider playing a role. I felt like myself. He, in turn, told me about the tuna. He talked about the currents, the way the moon affected the tides, the specific type of bait he used. He spoke about the ocean not as a resource to be plundered, but as a living, breathing entity, a powerful and unpredictable partner that had to be respected, understood, and sometimes fought with. His passion was palpable, his knowledge vast and intuitive. It was a different kind of intelligence from mine, a physical, elemental wisdom that I found myself deeply admiring. His massive plate of food arrived, and he dug in with an appetite that was impressive. I just nursed my coffee, content to watch him, to listen. The knot of anxiety in my stomach had loosened, replaced by a warm, hopeful hum. Maybe I had been wrong about everything. Maybe the hand-holding wasn't an accident. Maybe this easy camaraderie we were sharing was the start of something. Then Sarah, the town librarian, walked in. She spotted us immediately, a bright smile lighting up her face. She was pretty, with a kind face and warm, intelligent eyes. She came over to our booth, her hand immediately going to Finn's shoulder in a gesture of casual, familiar intimacy. "Hey you," she said, her voice soft. "Heard you were back early. Rough night." "Long one," Finn said, his mouth full of pancake. He smiled up at her, a different kind of smile than the ones he'd given me. It was softer, more familiar, but a good one. "I see that," she said, her eyes crinkling. She looked at me, and her smile was just as warm. "Hi, Leo. He didn't work you too hard this morning, did he?" "Not at all," I managed to say, my own smile feeling stiff and unnatural on my face. "Well, I won't interrupt your breakfast," she said, squeezing Finn's shoulder. "I'm just grabbing a coffee to go. I'll see you tonight." "You bet," Finn said. She gave him one last smile, a quick, affectionate nod to me, and walked up to the counter. The warm hum in my chest went cold. It was like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head, extinguishing the fragile flame of hope. "See you tonight." Of course. They were a couple. He was straight. I was an idiot. The hand-holding was an accident born of exhaustion. The easy conversation was just him being a decent boss, thanking his employee for helping him out. I had built a whole fantasy, a whole future, out of a tired gesture and a shared breakfast. The shame was a hot, bitter flood in my throat. Finn turned back to his breakfast, seemingly oblivious to the complete and utter collapse of my emotional state. He took a large bite of bacon, chewing thoughtfully. The diner, which had felt so warm and comforting just moments before, now felt loud and suffocating. I needed to get out of there. I needed to go back to my room and hide. "Well," I said, my voice sounding strained to my own ears, "I should probably let you finish. I've got some things to do." I started to slide out of the booth. Finn's hand shot out and rested on my forearm, stopping me. His touch was light, but it held me in place as effectively as a steel trap. "Hey," he said, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "What's the rush?" Finish your coffee. I looked down at his hand on my arm. His fingers were resting just over my pulse point, and I was sure he could feel the frantic, panicked beat. I couldn't meet his eyes. I'm just tired, I lied. He was silent for a moment. I could feel his gaze on me, trying to figure me out. Okay, he said finally, and he slowly removed his hand. The release was a relief and a disappointment all at once. I'll see you tomorrow, then. Usual time. Yeah, I said, standing up. See you tomorrow. I fled the diner without looking back, the cheerful sounds and the smell of bacon chasing me out the door. I walked the few blocks back to the bait shop in a daze, the bright morning sun feeling harsh and accusatory. The world had snapped back into its proper alignment. Finn was straight. I was in love with my straight boss, and I had just made a complete fool of myself. The rest of the week was excruciating. I reverted to my old self, the quiet, efficient deckhand. I kept my head down, I did my work, and I avoided being alone with Finn at all costs. I was polite, but distant. I kept our conversations strictly professional, limited to tides, weather, and the needs of the charter clients. I was building a wall around myself, brick by painful brick, and I could feel him noticing. He would watch me sometimes, a confused, searching look in his eyes. He tried to draw me into conversation a few times, asking about a book I was reading or making a joke, but I would just give a short, non-committal answer and turn back to my task. The easy camaraderie we had shared in the diner was gone, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. I was breaking my own heart, and I was probably just baffling him. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult charter with a demanding family, we were cleaning up the boat. The silence between us was heavy, punctuated only by the screech of gulls and the spray of the hose. I was scrubbing the bait box with a vengeance, trying to work out my frustration on the stubborn, dried-on grime. Leo, his voice was quiet, but it cut through my concentration. I stopped scrubbing but didn't turn around. Did I do something wrong? He asked. The question was so direct, so earnest, it knocked the wind out of me. I finally turned to face him. He was standing by the console, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression genuinely pained. No, I said, my voice tight. Of course not. Why would you think that? Because you've barely said 2 words to me since we had breakfast, he said, his gaze unwavering. 1 minute we're talking, everything's fine, and the next, you're looking at me like I'm a stranger. My carefully constructed wall was starting to crumble. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell him the truth. I ran out of the diner because your girlfriend showed up and reminded me that every hopeful feeling I have for you is a complete and utter delusion. I've just been tired, I said again, the lie tasting thin and pathetic on my tongue. It's been a busy week. He didn't look convinced. He took a step closer. Is this about Sarah? The question hung in the air between us. My heart stopped. How could he know? Had I been that obvious? My face flushed hot with shame. I don't know what you're talking about, I mumbled, turning back to the bait box, scrubbing at a spot that was already clean. Look at me, Leo. His voice was soft, but it was a command. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned back to face him. He was closer now, only a few feet away. Sarah and I were friends. We have been for years. Sometimes we try to be more, but it never really sticks. It's comfortable. It's not. He trailed off, searching for the right word. He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. It's not what you think. I didn't know what to do with this information. It was a crack of light in my dark, self-imposed prison, but I was too afraid to hope. It's none of my business, I said stiffly. Maybe it is, he said, his voice dropping even lower. He took another step, closing the space between us until he was standing right in front of me. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. He was so close I could see the flecks of gray and green in his blue eyes. That morning in the shed, when I took your hand, that wasn't an accident. This is it. The moment where my world either shatters or reforms into something new and terrifying and beautiful. My breath catches in my throat. I can't speak. I can only stare up at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He reaches out, slowly, as if giving me time to pull away. His fingers brush against my cheek, his thumb stroking gently along my jawline. His touch is hesitant, questioning. It's the opposite of the firm, functional touches from the morning in the shed. This is different. This is personal. I'm not good with words, Leo, he says, his voice a low rumble that vibrates right through me. Not like you. I don't know how to say things. I just do them. His gaze drops to my lips, and then back to my eyes. The air crackles with a tension that is almost unbearable. The sounds of the dock, the gulls, the distant hum of an engine, the gentle lapping of the water, all fade into a dull roar. The only thing that feels real is the man standing in front of me, the warmth of his hand on my face, the impossibly blue eyes that seem to be looking right into my soul. And then a voice, loud and cheerful, shatters the moment. "Finn, got a minute?" It's one of the other fishermen, walking down the dock toward us. Finn's hand drops from my face as if it's been burned. He takes a half step back, putting a respectable, professional distance between us. The spell is broken. The world comes rushing back in, loud and intrusive. "Yeah, 1 second, Mark," Finn calls out, his voice miraculously steady. He glances back at me, his expression a complicated mix of frustration and something else I can't decipher. He opens his mouth as if to say something, then seems to think better of it. He just gives me a short, sharp nod and turns to walk toward the other man. I stand there, frozen, my cheek still tingling where he touched me. I watch him go, watch him fall into easy conversation with the other fisherman, laughing at something he said. He claps the man on the shoulder. He is once again Finn, the capable, friendly, straight boat captain. And I am just his deckhand. The moment, the confession, the possibility, it all evaporates like sea spray in the sun. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had misinterpreted everything. Again, my mind is a chaotic swirl of hope and doubt. That wasn't an accident. The words echo in my head. But the ease with which he slipped back into his public persona, the sudden distance he put between us, it makes me question everything. I finish cleaning the boat on autopilot, my mind miles away. I coil the ropes, stow the gear, my movements mechanical. When I'm done, Finn is still talking to the other fisherman. I don't wait for him. I just grab my bag and walk away, my sneakers silent on the wooden planks of the dock. I don't look back. That night, a storm rolled in. It wasn't in the forecast. It came in fast and violent, a furious squall that lashed the coast with horizontal rain and howling wind. The power in my small room above the bait shop flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I sat by the window, watching the rain slant down in the faint, eerie light of the emergency lamps on the dock. The boats in the harbor strained against their moorings, their masts swaying wildly. My phone buzzed. A text message. The screen lit up the darkroom. It was from Finn. "You okay?" My fingers trembled as I typed back. "Yeah, just dark." A moment later, another message. "The siren's starboard line is looking frayed. Worried it won't hold in this. I'm heading down to double it up. Stay put. It's nasty out there. Stay put." It was an order. A sensible one. But I thought of him out there, alone on the slick, bucking docks in the middle of this gale. I thought of that frayed line. Before I could second-guess myself, I was pulling on my waterproof jacket and shoving my feet into my boots. The wind nearly tore the door from my hand when I opened it. The rain was a solid wall of water, cold and stinging. I bent my head against the gale and fought my way down the exterior stairs and onto the dock. The wooden planks were treacherous, slick with rain. The roar of the wind and the crashing of the waves was deafening. I saw the beam of a powerful flashlight cutting through the deluge, aimed at the side of the siren. I stumbled toward it, my jacket already soaked through. "Finn," I yelled, my voice swallowed by the storm. He whipped the flashlight beam around, and it caught me in the face, blinding me. "Leo, what the hell are you doing out here? I told you to stay put." His voice was a furious roar over the wind. "You needed a hand," I yelled back, repeating the words he had said to me that morning, the words that had started all of this. He held the light on me for a second longer, and in its harsh glare, I could see the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, the grim set of his jaw. He let out a frustrated sound, then turned the beam back to the boat. "Fine. Make yourself useful. Hold this." He shoved the heavy flashlight into my hands and grabbed a thick coil of rope. The dock pitched and swayed beneath our feet like the deck of a ship. I trained the beam where he was working, my knuckles white as I gripped the light. He moved with a desperate urgency, his body braced against the wind, his movements sure and certain even in the chaos of the storm. He was trying to loop the new rope around a cleat on the boat, but the boat was bucking too violently, pulling it just out of his reach. He swore, a raw, frustrated sound that was torn away by the wind. He tried again, leaning dangerously far over the edge of the dock. A particularly strong gust of wind hit us, and the dock heaved. Finn lost his footing. Time seemed to slow down. I saw him slip, his arms flailing for a moment before he went over the edge, into the churning, black water between the dock and the heavy hull of the boat. Finn. The name was ripped from my throat, a raw scream of pure terror. Without a single thought, I dropped the flashlight and threw myself flat on the slick dock, my arm plunging into the icy water up to my shoulder. My fingers brushed against the rough fabric of his jacket. I got a handful and held on, my muscles screaming in protest as the weight of his body and the pull of the current threatened to drag me in after him. "Hold on," I screamed, my voice cracking. His head broke the surface, sputtering and coughing. He grabbed onto my arm with both of his hands, his grip like a vice. The boat shifted, groaning as it was slammed against the dock pilings, threatening to crush him between the two. "Let go," he yelled, his face pale in the darkness. "It's going to crush us." "No," I yelled back, my voice raw with desperation. I wasn't going to lose him. I couldn't. I held on with everything I had, my face pressed against the rough, wet wood of the dock, the rain and sea spray blinding me. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I pulled. He used my grip to find purchase on a piling, and together, we managed to get him out of the deadly space. He hauled himself onto the dock, collapsing next to me, a sodden, shivering heap. We lay there for a moment, side by side in the torrential rain, both of us gasping for breath, our hearts pounding. The storm raged around us, but in that moment, it was as if we were the only two people in the world. He rolled over, pushing himself up onto his elbows. He looked at me, his eyes wide in the darkness. Water streamed down his face. "You're an idiot," he said, his voice rough with a mixture of anger and something else. "So are you." I gasped back, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my chest. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and in the darkness, I could feel the weight of his gaze. Then he moved. He crawled the short distance between us and gathered me up in his arms, pulling me against his chest. He was soaking wet and freezing cold, but his arms around me were strong and solid. He held me tightly, his face buried in my neck, his body trembling with cold and the aftermath of adrenaline. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't going to let you drown," I whispered back into his wet sweatshirt. We stayed like that for a long time, clinging to each other on the storm-tossed dock, the wind and rain a wild symphony around us. He was real. He was alive. He was holding me. Nothing else mattered. Eventually, the shivering became uncontrollable. "We need to get inside," he said, his teeth chattering. He helped me to my feet, his arms securely around my waist, and we stumbled together through the storm to the processing shed. It was the closest shelter. Inside, the world was blessedly quiet and still. The only sound was the drumming of the rain on the tin roof and the howl of the wind outside. It was pitch black. Finn fumbled around for a moment before finding a powerful emergency lantern. He clicked it on, and the small space was filled with a bright, sterile light. We stood there, dripping and shivering, looking at each other. His hair was plastered to his head, his face was pale, and his lips had a bluish tinge. I probably looked even worse. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," he said, his voice practical, but his eyes never left my face. He started stripping off his soaked sweatshirt and t-shirt, his movements stiff with cold. My eyes were drawn to the expanse of his chest, the hard planes of his stomach, the way the water droplets glistened on his skin in the lantern light. He was beautiful. He tossed the wet clothes in a corner and looked at me expectantly. "Your turn." My fingers were numb and clumsy as I fumbled with the zipper of my jacket. I peeled it off, along with my soaked sweater, until I was standing there in just my t-shirt, which was clinging to my skin like a second skin. I was shaking so hard I couldn't stop. Finn found a couple of old, clean towels that he kept for cleaning the boat. They were rough and smelled faintly of bleach. He tossed one to me and started vigorously rubbing himself dry with the other. I did the same, the rough texture of the towel a welcome friction against my freezing skin. We were trapped by the storm, in this small, cold, sterile room, half-dressed and shivering. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the terror of what had just happened and the raw, undeniable fact that I had just saved his life, and he had held me like he never wanted to let go. He finished drying himself and came over to me. He took the towel from my hands and started drying my hair, his movements surprisingly gentle. "You're shaking," he murmured. You're cold too." I stuttered, my teeth chattering. "Not as much as you," he said. He wrapped the towel around my shoulders, and then his arms came around me, pulling me against his bare chest. The shock of his skin against mine, his warmth, was electric. He was still cold, but he was warmer than I was. He held me tightly, rubbing my back with his large, warm hands, trying to chafe some warmth back into me. "Better?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against my ear. I could only nod, my face pressed against his collarbone. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart under my cheek. It was the most reassuring sound I had ever heard. I breathed in his scent, salt, and rain, and the clean, masculine smell of his skin. It was intoxicating. This was it, the breaking point. The storm outside and the storm inside me were about to collide. I tilted my head back to look at him. His face was inches from mine. The lantern cast stark shadows across his features, making his jaw look sharper, his eyes darker and deeper. The pretense was gone. The walls were down. There was nothing left between us but the raw, terrifying truth. "Finn," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I know," he whispered back. And then he lowered his head and he kissed me. It wasn't a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was a kiss born of terror and relief and a longing that had been simmering for months. It was desperate and deep and hungry. His lips were cold from the rain, but they were soft, and they moved against mine with a certainty that stole the breath from my lungs. His hand came up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my damp hair, holding me in place as he kissed me. I responded with equal fervor, my hands coming up to grip his strong, bare arms. All the months of silent yearning, of hopeless pining, of carefully guarded emotions, came pouring out of me. It was a kiss that was a confession, an absolution, an answer to a question I had been too afraid to even ask. It tasted of salt and rain and hope. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We rested our foreheads together, our breath mingling in the cold air. The rain still hammered on the roof, a wild percussion to the frantic beating of our hearts. "You look at me like you're starving, Leo," he said, his voice rough with emotion, echoing the words I thought he might say earlier. "Maybe I am," I breathed. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. The confusion, the frustration, it was all gone. In its place was a raw vulnerability, a fierce tenderness that made my own heart ache. "Me too," he said, his voice thick. And he kissed me again. This time it was slower, more deliberate. It was a kiss of exploration, of discovery. He was learning the shape of my lips, and I was learning his. It was a promise. It was a beginning. In the heart of the storm, in the cold, sterile light of an emergency lantern, I felt like I had finally come home. We didn't talk much more after that. The words weren't necessary. He found an old, thick blanket in a storage locker, one he kept for emergencies. We wrapped ourselves in it, huddling together for warmth on a pile of clean, folded tarps in the corner of the shed. He held me all night, his arms a solid, reassuring presence around me. I fell asleep to the sound of his steady breathing and the drumming of the rain, feeling safer and more at peace than I had in my entire life. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight on my face. The storm had passed. The rain had stopped. The world outside the shed was quiet, washed clean. For a moment, I was disoriented. Then it all came flooding back. The storm, the fall, the fear, the kiss. I was still wrapped in Finn's arms. He was still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful in a way I had never seen before. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened, making him look younger, more vulnerable. A lock of his dark hair had fallen across his forehead. I had the overwhelming urge to reach out and brush it back, but I didn't want to wake him. I just lay there, watching him breathe, memorizing the shape of his face in the soft morning light. Anxiety, a cold and familiar companion, started to creep in. What now? What did this mean? Last night was a product of adrenaline and fear and a near-death experience. In the cold, rational light of day, would he regret it? Would he retreat back behind his wall of stoic competence, chalking it all up to the storm? The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. Quietly, carefully, I slipped out of his arms. He stirred, murmuring something in his sleep, but didn't wake. I pulled on my still damp clothes, which felt cold and clammy against my skin. I needed to think. I needed space. I crept out of the shed and into the bright, clean morning. The dock was a mess. Debris was scattered everywhere, and a few of the smaller boats had taken some damage. But the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air was fresh and clean. The world looked the same, but nothing was the same. I walked to the end of the dock and sat down, my legs dangling over the edge, and stared out at the calm, glittering water. The ocean that had been a raging monster just hours before was now peaceful and serene. I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in my thoughts. Long enough for the sun to warm my face and start to dry my clothes. Long enough for my anxiety to build into a near unbearable crescendo. I was composing my escape plan in my head. I would pack my bags, leave him a note, and be on the first bus out of town. It would be easier than facing the potential rejection, the awkwardness, the pity. Thought I might find you out here. His voice was quiet, right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. He sat down next to me, his leg brushing against mine. He was holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He held one out to me. My hand was shaking as I took it. We sat in silence for a long time, sipping our coffee, watching the water. The silence wasn't awkward. It was pensive, full. He wasn't rushing to speak, to explain away last night. He was just being present beside me. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and calm. Slept better than I have in years. The simple statement was so unexpected, so profoundly reassuring, that all the air rushed out of my lungs. I finally turned to look at him. He was watching me, his expression open and serious. There was no regret in his eyes, only a quiet, steady certainty. Me too, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He reached over and took my free hand. He laced his fingers through mine, just as he had done that morning that felt like a lifetime ago. This time, there was no ambiguity. It wasn't a request for help. It was a statement, a connection. He held my hand firmly, his thumb stroking gently over my knuckles. I'm not good at this, Leo, he said, looking out at the water. Talking about feeling stuff. I don't have the words you do, but I know what I feel. He turned his head to look at me, his gaze intense. And last night, that was real. It wasn't just the storm. Relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I thought you might regret it. I confessed. A small, sad smile touched his lips. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. I've been fighting this for a long time, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Trying to be the person everyone in this town expects me to be. He shook his head. I'm done fighting it. The other fishermen were starting to arrive, their voices carrying across the water as they assessed the storm damage. The real world was intruding again. I felt a pang of fear, the old instinct to hide, to retreat. Finn must have sensed it. He squeezed my hand. It's okay, he said quietly. Let them talk. I don't care anymore. And as Mark, the fisherman from the day before, walked down the dock toward us, Finn didn't let go of my hand. He held on, a quiet, defiant act of ownership. Mark's eyes flickered down to our joined hands, and then back up to Finn's face. A look of surprise, then dawning comprehension, crossed his features. He just gave a slow nod, a look of respect in his eyes, and kept walking. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. Finn wasn't going to hide. He wasn't going to pretend. He was choosing this, choosing me, out here in the bright, unforgiving light of day. That evening, after a long day of cleaning up storm damage and dealing with insurance calls, he took me to his house. It was a small, weathered cottage perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean. It was simple, masculine, and comfortable. It smelled like him, like salt water and wood smoke. We didn't talk about the future, about what this all meant. We didn't need to. Not yet. Instead, we made dinner. We moved around his small kitchen in an easy, comfortable silence, a dance we had never practiced, but somehow both knew the steps to. He chopped vegetables while I made a salad. His hand would brush my back as he passed behind me. I would hand him a spice before he asked for it. It was a simple, domestic intimacy that felt more profound, more real, than any grand romantic gesture. Later, we sat on his porch, watching the last rays of the sun paint the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The ocean was calm, a vast expanse of deepening blue. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. I thought about the man I was just a few months ago, lonely, disconnected, an observer of my own life. I had come here to escape, to hide. I had been watching Finn from a distance, projecting a whole life onto him, a life that didn't include me. I had labeled him the straight fisherman, a convenient box that kept him safe, unattainable, and kept me from having to risk my own heart. But he wasn't a label. He was a man, a quiet, steady, surprisingly vulnerable man who saw me more clearly than anyone ever had. He wasn't the catalyst for my change. He was the destination. He was the person who made me want to stop observing and start living. He tilted my chin up with his fingers and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that was full of promise. It wasn't a kiss of desperation or relief. It was a kiss that felt like a foundation, something solid we could build on. "Stay," he whispered against my lips. "Don't go back to the city at the end of the summer." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A simple, declarative sentence that held the weight of a whole future. "Okay," I whispered back. It was that easy. It was that simple. And as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, I looked at the man beside me, his profile strong and sure against the fading light, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was no longer starving. I was home.